Shannon, you always tell me those stories about Baal. I think there might be something there for us to learn from. Maybe share a story.
Sure. Yeah. The Baal cycle is the fight between Baal and Mot. Baal is the sky god, one of the sons of El. In the Baal cycle, Baal is forced to reckon with Mot. Mot is the personification of death and death itself, right? It's the word death and the god death. In order for Baal to conquer death, or conquer Mot, he has to go down to the underworld. Mm-hmm. And the only way for Baal to get to the underworld is to die, right? So similar to, the Greek mythology, where you couldn't go to the underworld if you weren't dead. Mm-hmm. That's how your soul got into Hades. But what he's forced to do is take a child and kill that child in order to get into the underworld, so as to trick death and make death think that he has defeated Baal, right? Mm-hmm. But once Mot realizes that Baal has tricked him, then it's like this never-ending cycle of seeking revenge on Baal. The idea is that Baal was supposed to die himself.
But they're wrestling with that primordial fear of death, right? The death anxiety, trying to make sense of wrestling with death, right?
Yeah.
Why do you think they're passing that story around,
Some scholars have argued that it is a story that basically is supposed to be an example for cyclical time, going in and out of seasons. Something like Persephone in Hades, where Persephone spends the fall and winter in the underworld, and she spends spring and summer up with her mother Demeter, right? So it could have some connotations with the change of the seasons. Some can argue, I suppose, that it is a way for people to find some solace, or find some peace, or be at peace with death. It's almost like death is a god. What I mean? That death has a physical presence, in the world, and to explain it, you need to put it in some kind of story form. The ancient Canananites, who would include, the Phoenicians, who would include the later, what would be called the Hebrews or the Israelites, would include the people who spoke Ugaritic, which is the Amorites. All these people would have had some kind of understanding of this story, and it would have been probably told over generations, right? They would have been very familiar with the Baal cycle. Israelite tradition, it would be Yahweh, right? Yahweh. So and of course Yahweh defeating evil, or Yahweh defeating chaos, or the Leviathan, and the beast, and things of that nature. So there seem to be these very similar mythological frameworks around the figure of death, or death itself. Yeah. The other thing that I want to incorporate in there is, of course, the child sacrifice. right? Which is I think so important. I mean, a lot of people talk about this in terms of Baal and child sacrifice, and talk about the Phoenicians or the Carthaginians, right? Who were of course related to the Phoenicians and other Canaanite groups speaking Semitic languages. That it's not just the Canaanite groups were sacrificing children. It's when you incorporate the Christian message, the Christian story, right? It's that Jesus does not sacrifice another life in his stead, right? He willingly gives up his own life, and he still escapes the clutches of death. So Molt thinks that he got Christ, right? Satan thinks that he got Christ, right? But all power is in Christ's hands, is in God's hands, right? And he finally, once and for all, destroys Molt, right? Yeah. He destroys Satan, right? And so, yes, I think that myth, right, of the Baal cycle has serious, comparisons to the story of Christ and his victory over death. It's only when we get to, I think, Christ that we really see, death is conquered once and for all.
You and I talk about René Girard a lot. René Girard is good to help us see that the similarity between Christianity and myth, but also the breakaway. And it's both that have to be brought into light for us to see the full picture of how much Christianity has shaped the world that we're living in today, here in the modern world,
right?
And the problems that we're facing.
The other thing is that Christianity has a huge bank of information that's coming before it, that Christ is able to kind of work with, right? So he has this arsenal that he can kind of use, because being God, he's able to see, throughout history, what human beings are doing to each other, and what the gods demand of human beings, what these other beings are demanding of mankind, right? Or you might say what human beings think the gods are demanding of them, right? Christ is turning that on its head, right? Saying that God does not demand a life, to be, in order to be pleased, right? You read it in Isaiah, he says, I don't want any more of your burnt offerings, right? I don't want, I don't demand a sacrifice. What I demand is you turn away from your evil ways. Christ is a kind of precursor to these ancient epics, right? To the ancient cycles like Baal, and then they're inverted. You know what I mean? It's like flipped on his head, right? Baal, like Christ is not the trickster. Christ is not, trying to, subvert, right? He has real power, right? It's not tricking death. It's I'm stamping death out. Like I have victory over you, right? You cannot hold me.
See, all of humanity has been creating these stories, these gods that are made in our own image. And our ideologies today are kind of vestiges of those gods. And when we project the idea that if we were God, and humans are making a mess of things and being vicious and disgusting to one another, if we were in charge, we'd come in with some force and stamp it out.
Right.
We'd show some might to
Right.
make it right.
Right.
But God doesn't do that in the story of what Jesus embodies, right?
Yeah.
And that's disrupted. It's created this alternate frequency that we're living in today,
Right.
where all of our big ideas are haunted by the idea of what we've been doing, as Girard says, to find peace, is that we're sacrificing, like you said with Baal, children, but also elderly and rich and poor and peasant and
Right.
disfigured and disabled and those who can't fight back to find meaning, to find order, because we need to vent our frustrations out on people.
Right.
And that's been a convenient, unfortunate reality that we don't want to face even to this day. And I think a lot of the problems that we're finding in our world today is that humanity has an inability to look in the mirror fully. And we know how to do it in an abstract sense. People watch movies and they're like, yeah, absolute power, yeah, that always corrupts people. But they don't know how to look that in the mirror for their own particular issues that drive them to want to have justice in the earth, and the justice in the world. Just a little bit of force here, a little bit of violence here, a little bit of preemptive and aggression here, and I'll make it right because these people are awful, right? Yeah. But Jesus sees the child sacrificing and all this stuff, and he doesn't say, I'm done with this, it's all bad. He's like, he subtly works from within it, flips it, because he's like a painter who's working with our ridiculous, blind spots and molding it in a direction that gives us a chance to freely move out of it, right? Without trying to force us, because that's not going to work.
Yeah, you observe your own conscience. You know what I mean? Like you like you say all the time, like take the beam out of your own eye. Recognize your own faults, right? And recognize that everyone falls short,
right?
Of the glory of God. You know what I mean? And that's not to say that I guess that's not to say we shouldn't I guess the Christian term would be rebuke wrong or rebuke injustice, right? But it is to recognize that the people that say are enacting injustice in the world, I think maybe don't recognize what they're doing. You know what I mean? It's like that Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do.
Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. That's something that you don't hear anybody talking about in social media today or anything, but that seems to be something that would provide a kind of pathway out of the hot stove, the boiled cauldron, or whatever you want to call it, whatever metaphor you have for this moment, at least in the West, wherever we're at, where people are they've had it. The polarization's hot. The fear of civil war is alive. There's all these things that people, they've just come to a point of a tipping point, But you like myths.
Very much. It speaks to our nature, whether it's things that are obvious and things that are a little bit more suppressed. And kind of speaking to the cycle of violence, to the Girardian cycle of violence, particularly there's the concept of the shadow, laid out by Carl Jung, a great psychologist, probably the greatest one of the 20th century. And he talked about something called shadow projection. So first thing, the shadow is that darker side of our soul that exists within us. It's that part of ourselves that we try to pretend isn't there, and we try to pretend it's sort of like the other. But it's there. And what Jung would say is that the more we try to pretend it isn't there, and the more that we don't deal with it, we will project it onto other people. And oftentimes that projection, us projecting that onto someone else, can lead us to scapegoat someone else, especially in a collective movement.
Jung gets into this anima and animus thing, right? And this idea of the masculine and feminine that we all have. All humans have this, right? In different manifestations. But that can also speak to a culture, to a time, to a moment in history where it goes out of balance, right? How do we bring that into something that gives us insight into why we're in the mess we're in today, where people can't get along and they can't make sense of anything and nobody can agree on everything? How does something that seems so abstract and fairy tale bring us back to where we're at?
Well, something we got to remember is what we're talking about here are what we call archetypes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there are several archetypes, but probably the most significant ones are the shadow, that kind of deep, darker side of our soul, and then there's the anima and the animus, and the anima and the animus are what we would kind of call the masculine and feminine, the yin and the yang part of our soul, part of our psyche. And the best way to describe each one of those is the anima would be like the anima is the feminine, meaning that it's the sustainer, the intuitive, the nurturer, but also too, along with that, the chaos, but also the moment. On the other hand, we have the animus, which is the masculine, which is rationality, planning, the future. And the thing is, both of these have their better side, and they have their darker side. And what we can kind of see through history is the pendulum swinging between the animus being dominant in society and the anima being dominant in society. What we're seeing today is the pendulum swinging in the West away from the animus having been dominant toward the anima.
Masculine, right?
Yes, yeah. From the masculine, the rationality, the science, the pre-planned. That whole paradigm is shifting now more toward the intuitive, the feeling, the connectedness.
And that's because basically the 20th century was kind of getting drunk on masculine overkill, or how do you see that coming in?
Well, what we could really say is, in many ways, it began with the Enlightenment. It was kind of born out of the Enlightenment, out of the Protestant Reformation. In that time period, that's kind of when the pendulum swung very, very hard in the direction of the masculine, of the animus, where what we ended up seeing was a world that was based on objective facts and science, and it was based on rationality, and that ended up becoming the reigning paradigm of the following centuries. Now we're kind of experiencing the erosion of that paradigm, and the pendulum is swinging the other direction, swinging the direction toward the anima, which a lot of us look at that and we say, well, we look at the world around us and we say, what's happening here? We don't consider the objective anymore to be what matters. We consider the subjective to be what matters.
Like you're living your truth,
right? And that it's about that rather than the fact being objectively true, what matters is, what does the fact mean? How does it connect to you? How does it make you feel? And does
it bother you? Does it make you feel unsafe?
Yes.
Right.
And that's the pendulum swinging. It's swinging away from the...
And that's a natural thing to do because, the record of the 20th century, right? You got body bags, you got chemical explosions, you got people going way too hard on trying to chop up and cut and stab and order and, imprint by force a lot of sacrificial concepts of how the world should be run, People don't like hearing that there's like a masculine and a feminine, right? This is the age where people are not supposed to be saying that kind of stuff. So what you're saying is kind of out of style, in terms of where we're at. But that's exactly, I guess, what you would say should be happening if we're entering into an intuitive swing away from overcalculation and quantification, right?
Well, and one of the ways to think about it is that a society is a collection of people, right? And the thing is that when you have a collection of people, in the same way that the anima and the animus exist within the human mind itself. And so when you end up having a whole society, which is a collection of people, a collection of human minds, you end up having a collective anima or animus for that society. But getting back to the 20th, to specifically kind of the height of the animus in the West, which I can't think of better imagery for that than World War I, where you have machine guns and tanks and all kinds of horrendous weapons of war which were used for the first time to really mass murder people on a very large scale. That was the height of scientific achievement turned on human society, turned to destroy it.
But can we put a gender to that? And why is it important to talk about it in those terms, you know? I mean, not that you're talking about gender. You're talking about something, I guess, a little bit more psychological than that, right? Or...
Well, one of the reasons that it's important to think about it in terms of, to associate these things with gender, is that around the world universally, we talked about myths, right? Around the world universally, human beings communicate in the form of narratives and myths and stories. You have a universal image of what a man or what the masculine is, and you also have a universal image of what the female is. And these attributes, the attributes of the animus, which is the masculine, are manifest in each one of these myths around the world, myths and stories. And it doesn't matter how far back you're going. These archetypes are there.
Yeah. It's just interesting to see, you know, that it does seem like we were overly, we were trying to build a Tower of Babel, you know, in the modern age. And now we're in this postmodern age where we're saying this is all useless, this is domination, this is oppression, you know. And there was a lot of oppression in the 20th century and before that. Yes. Colonialism and neo-colonialism, this stuff, there's layers and layers and layers upon this. And, you know, we have this clash between kind of what, again, that cyclical, the eternal return that the story of Baal represents, and then this infusion of this Christian story which says, no, we're not always going to keep doing this whole fight over and over again. We're going to go somewhere in history. We're moving somewhere. We're going to progress. And that's what's animating the left-wing kind of, what's so-called left part of the West, is that we've got to go somewhere. We can't keep going to this, you know, masculine, feminine, you know, thing. We got to go somewhere. We got to go to a whole new world where we can finally bring a true equality. And not just that, but now equity. We're going to right all the wrongs. The deficits of the past are going to be righted with surpluses into the future.
Do you think there's a society that exists today, which is still caught up in the masculine and thinks that there's a teleology still stuck in the masculine, right? I mean, I'm, you know.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
China is an excellent example, because China still operates under 5-year plans, and if you go back, their system, their ruling bureaucry it comes directly from the Soviet Union. The idea that we as people can somehow have the adequate amount of information to plan our entire way of life from the top down.
We can objectively measure science and economics and everything and chart out people's destiny, right?
Yes.
Yeah, like a mathematical or scientific formula, right?
Yes.
That's the whole basis of the Soviet system. Or it was, right?
It was.
And then China, you're saying, is still trying to keep that kind of frame going into the future.
And the very interesting thing is that you have this duality of the East versus the West. Mm-hmm. That you have the West, which is moving in the direction of the feminine, mm-hmm. and you have the East, which is swinging the complete opposite direction.
Yeah. That's
swinging further and further and further into dominance of of rationality and the masculine and science.
And aren't we supposed to have a pole shift anytime soon? So it kind of nice little coincidence there, right?
Yeah.
The magnets are shifting, right? The polarity of the magnet is shifting. Because I guess traditionally the East would be more in that feminine or the anima, right?
The East had been.
Yeah. And now they're going in another direction. It's time for them to kind of take that scientific theory of Marx and bring it into fruition, right?
Yep.
It's time to prove our thesis, all right? And they're using, and I guess China's using our Christian tradition of being concerned with the vulnerable, being concerned with the oppressed.
Yeah, against
and they're hacking it against us in some sense, right? And of course, we're doing a good job of it on our own.
So
we don't want to make them out to be another,
yeah,
boogeyman. Oh yeah, they're the ones causing us to get into crazy disputes about cereal and obsession about these things that, while people were dying of drug overdoses, we're fighting over these nominalistic things, right? Yeah. Logos and symbols. But you can see that they kind of like this. They would rather this keep going for us and kind of keep pushing us like, yeah. Keep fighting yourselves. You've got a lot of oppression amongst you. It's like throwing a dog, a pack of dogs, a bunch of red meat, and seeing them fight over it.
It's like a trickster god.
Yeah.
It's like the trickster god or the Joker or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just gonna create chaos because, you guys are good at blowing your own selves up. You know what I mean? Like, why do we'll just throw a little something in there and
very little effort.
Yeah, very little effort.
And I think it's appropriate to even use these God terms in describing nations, because nations, the idea of a nation is a kind of vestige from those gods that, there was no distinction between religion and culture and state. These are all one thing in the ancient world, right? And so this idea of having, China acting like a trickster, using our own, our Christian, concern for the victim against us is we're seeing the battling of gods, even though they look deconstructed as nation states today.
Well, it's I mean, I think it's like even like what Shane was describing earlier about like the emperor, right? Like being the
like God's vicar on earth.
Yeah,
like God's representative on earth.
Yeah. It's kind of like they're a child of the God. You know what I mean? Like they're the son of the God.
That's like Caesar, right? Son of Augustus, son of God. The son of
the mandate of heaven.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Yeah, like the heavenly mandate. You know what I mean? Like this person is appointed by God to lead, and I mean, like you said, that there is no difference between like the political and the sacred. It's all kind of like one entity. That's what I guess the ancients would have seen it as. Like there's no difference. But I mean, yeah, I that whole thing about like the being very calculated and very organized and stuff like that. That used to be sort of the way that the West was. You had two lungs of the church. There was the east, and then the west, right? And like the west kind of represented the rationale and the precision and law, right? It had to be about logic and getting things right. And whereas the east was much more mystical, poetic. It was about aesthetics. It was about really trying to bring some kind of beauty into the world, right? And
the idea of word versus image too.
Right. Like icons and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, and so I mean, I think we're seeing like a shift.
Pole shift.
Yeah,
on another dimension. Just a magnetic pole shift.
And that's kind of another duality. The animus is usually associated with the masculine is usually associated with order.
Yeah.
And the feminine is usually the anima is associated with disorder on a societal level.
Yeah.
And the thing is that and that's in a very, very structural sense,
right?
Because the animus tends to be very, 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 very vertical in the way that things are planned, and the feminine tends to be more horizontal. So one of the things we're seeing is in the East, order is reigning. In China, order is reigning. In the West here, I think most of us would say that disorder is reigning.
Yeah. The woman scorned or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can see the sacred in our government stuff. Nancy Pelosi, when that riot happened in the Capitol, she said, "This is our temple. You've defiled our temple." And that's not a metaphor. That's literal. She may not have meant it that way, or maybe she did, but she let on more than she may have realized about the origins of the state having its roots in the vestige of sacrifice. Caiaphas crystallizes the heart of politics when he leads the charge to persecute and kill Jesus by saying, you don't understand. It's better that one man died than the whole nation perish. And that's why the Capitol is a temple, because that's the place where people come together and they deliberate about how they are going to mediate sacrifice, both abroad, which countries are we going to, create insurrection, chaos, or regime change? Which nation states, which lesser gods will we defeat because they have been, run by wicked people or what have you? That's the narrative. And then here at home, what are the things we're going to mediate out for sacrifice about speech, or what kind of weapon you can own, or what drug you can consume, whether your milk can be heated and sold, or whether it can be just can you sell it without heating it? These are things that they're going to do the sacred task that you don't have the right to do as an individual. I mean, you're in the profane space. In that sense, the Capitol is a sacred space, because in that moment of legislation and the other things that happen around DC, they can do that which you can't, which is decree who shall be expunged, who should be expelled into the belly of the prison system, which is kind of our modern day hell. You know what I mean? It's a living hell to be in prison. And we're wrestling with these issues. We have people protesting around the streets in this country about abolish the police, abolish the cops, abolish the prisons. So we're wrestling with this stuff. One person can look at the Capitol and they say that is a sacred place. Why is it sacred though? Because it's set apart to do that which we're not supposed to do to each other. But of course, it's not sacred in the sense that it doesn't unite us anymore. It doesn't bind us together. We don't agree. There's a mob running into it. It's horrible. People are dying. People are losing their wits on both sides of the aisle. And one side wants to say, no, that team's the only team that does profane violence. Our team's just fine. Anybody you see hurt in our violence, anybody that does a riot in our team, it's just an imposter. And both sides say that for each other. But you see these spasms of chaos and mob aggression boiling up, which means that the sacred isn't working.
Right, and that's the thing that
it's bubbling up.
That's what I want. That's what I want to ask you too, because I kind of think it's like Pope Benedict talks about this, and the further you are from the initial event, right? Like if you talk about sacrifice, someone's death, the further you are from that thing that kind of became sacred or deified, the less kind of effect it has, right? The less of a pharmacon it is. You know what I mean? It doesn't have the same catharsis
right?
because it's so diluted, right? Like the human being is no longer remembered for what it truly is, which is a murder or a death, right? Now it's become like just a passing word. Like that's why it's like when Easter comes, we're not really focused on Jesus being like the slain lamb or the sacrifice. Now it's like, like here's an Easter egg with a whole bunch of candy in it. Like,
right.
Let's,
right.
There's bunnies everywhere. So, you know what I mean? Here's some peeps.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It loses its potency.
Yeah,
right?
It doesn't have that same effect. So because I think that's what's wrong with, when you talk about politics and stuff, like that's what's wrong with Christianity is that effectiveness of Christ being the center, you know what I mean, and taking on, the being the sacrifice, is lost, and it's like how do you get that back? Like how do you have a, is there a return to the sacred? You know what I mean? Is there something that
can unite us together?
Yeah.
We cannot. When you look at what Rene Girard spelled out in history, we cannot unite around sacrifice anymore. And that's why, we can't agree on who the villains are. We can't agree on who the victims are. It's this complete schismatic attempt. Every time we try to impose a narrative that says, we're good, these are good, those are bad, it creates a schism. Boom, rebellion. And it creates a martyr's perch for the person that you're expelling. You are deplorable. Okay, now we've got t-shirts that say, hey, I'm a deplorable, I'm happy for that. And people who are on the sidelines of that say, I wasn't interested until you called him deplorable, now I want to take another look. Because we are in Jesus' fishbowl. We're swimming in it. And in Jesus' fishbowl, if the whole crowd says you're deplorable, they're going to say, I'm going to take a look at what's going on over there, because we are in the story of the stone that the builders has rejected has become the cornerstone. We're in that story, and that's like, what the heck is that? That's a description that Jesus gives for his life mission. What he's bringing a new world order into reality, right? In which the idea that which is expelled because it doesn't fit the narrative, and so therefore it has to play the role of the scapegoat, of the boogeyman, of the outcast. The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. It's become the cornerstone. The person who is rejected in a community is now the cornerstone because of that very rejection, because of that expulsion. It's the act of expulsion that makes that person have a martyr's energy, a sacred aura, and therefore from that moment can attract other people who were either involved in the scapegoating of that person or that behavior or that action or that identity or that racial group or gender, because there have been these acts of oppression happening and these expulsion and hierarchies mediated on maintaining people in a state of oppression. But Jesus is scrambling that whole hierarchical order and saying, no, the new order is you're going to have to learn to get together in this new order that I'm creating in history, that I've unleashed like a tactician into history, a grand strategist more like it. And people say whether he's, I don't think he's God. It's like, I think it's more of a miracle if he wasn't God then, If you want to take away the claim that he wasn't, what he has unleashed like a grand strategist of saying, I'm going to expose the way you have always created community, where you whitewash the victims out of the history books and you make them the villains, and when you write the stories about them, you impute guilty admissions onto your victims. And we still try to do that today. Look at the news, on both sides, always trying to impute guilt onto the person that the group or the political rival that they're trying to cast out as the villain in that narrative. And so we're just going to continue to fracture until we can learn, what I believe is what Jesus is trying to get us to do, is to see that the human person is where we have to ground our respect, and not identity tribes. That's what I see. Identity tribalism as kind of a return to the old order that we were trying to stop, that you don't judge people by their gender. You don't judge people because of what they look like, That's the occasion for scapegoating in the past, but now we're bringing it back, as if it's the only way we can protect victims is that if we get every victim to bind together in a group. That's what I've heard some people say. We can't have the luxury of individual rights until we get our group rights.
Do we need a balance between the anima and the animus? Or is this going to be a continuous pendulum swinging back and forth? Like history.
It will probably continue to be a pendulum swinging back and forth. We'll probably continue to see history undulate, swing in the form of cycles, that hit, kind of working through a process.
So do you think there's going to be, because my thing is like, if that's the case, then where's the kind of final end to that? Where's the teleology? If it's like we're going through some kind of these cycles all the time, is there, do you think there's some kind of like end to that? Like,
so does history always repeat, or are we going to get somewhere?
Right? Because my thing is like, I want to see a end to that. Like, mm-hmm. I want to see a, some kind of like, end result where there's like balance or something like that between
harmony.
Harmony, or
And that goes to what you talk about, because with Carl Jung, you talk about how he's about the individual, the psyche, and then you talk about, where we get into Rene Girard, that's more about the anthropology and the community, the evolution of the human species and how we make society, and there's a balance that needs to happen there too, right? One and many, comes together here.
And the fact is that the two of them, Jung and Girard, both go together very well. In fact, the two kind of unlock each other.
Even though, some Girard's fans would say, no, we don't have any time for psychology and what Jung's doing. But I do see you can look at these things on different layers and get some correlating truths, right?
Right. It would be sort of like, yeah, it would be sort of like looking at something from two different points of view. Mm-hmm. What it does is it enriches your understanding of whatever that item is. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what Jung and Girard both do for one another.
Right. One would be looking kind of like at the, you said it before, like bottom up, and one's the other way.
Yes, that Girard is looking at everything from the top down. Is kind of like looking at everything from an eagle's point of view, and then Jung is looking at everything from the bottom up. Yeah. Is looking at the individual's mind. But the thing is that really to really understand the full picture, we've got to understand both.
Yeah. And the irony is like you're talking about an eagle's point of view, which reminds me of like a God's point of view.
Yeah.
Because he's trying to map how did humans have religion and how do we survive, right? And Girard says that religion is the placenta. It's what kept us together because we're so mimetic, we're so hyper mirror neuron in our aggression that unlike animals where they'll just submit, to a rival without going into genocide, we go the other way. We go mimetically into insane, violent imitation, tit for tat forever. And so he's like, well, how are we still here if that's how we do things? And he stumbles into this pattern of the scapegoat expulsion, of channeling all that bad blood onto a common threat or a common victim or a common person who's too different that stands out from where everybody else is in that moment of reciprocal sameness, right? And at the same time, so he's seeing it from this God's view, but then we get the trick that it turns out God's a human person, a baby. He starts as a baby, right? So now we're getting that individual to get to the God's view, The camera of history, that's what Jesus says, behold, I see Satan fall like lightning. We thought the gods were on the side of what we were doing, and all of a sudden that camera falls like lightning, and it shows up in a barn, right, with the baby in a food trough, and you're like, oh, what's this? This is a lot closer to Earth than we were expecting. This is not the kind of God we were looking for. And we've been expelling him ever since. The story of Jesus and Barabbas is a great example for our time, right?
Yes.
Because Barabbas, Bar Abbas, of the Father, and in the earliest text of the Gospels, it says that his name is Jesus Barabbas. So there's a tale of two Jesuses. And Pilate's offering the crowd, who do you want to save? You can save one guy. I'll let you save one guy. And people think of Barabbas as kind of like this Jack the Ripper fella, in the Sunday school idea. He's just out there killing people. He's just a bloody murderer. It's like, no, he was a revolutionary. He saw the injustices of his time. He saw that his people were oppressed and raped and assaulted in different ways. And he wanted to do something about it by force. He wanted to enact some social justice or whatever kind of justice you want. And the crowd chose him. They said, let's save him and let's kill the guy who says love our neighbor. Let's desire mercy, not sacrifice. Let's turn the other cheek and disable this through nonviolence and forbearance of people's aggression. And I think we're still choosing the wrong Jesus 2,000 years later, We're still choosing the false Jesus' way, the one who wants revolution, the one who wants overthrow of our oppressors. But now we're so haunted by that we can't, we're suspicious of everything that has institutional staying power. Math is a problem now. You like math?
Yeah.
Math is structurally oppressive. We're worried about math. We're also worried about Shakespeare. Shakespeare needs to be taken out of the classroom.
Yeah.
And there's a real vicious movement towards this, and it will get stronger and stronger and stronger.
Yeah, he shouldn't have wrote Romeo and Juliet, bro. Yeah.
Where does this, like you say, where does this end? That's the question of our time. Where does this go? Because the right wants to just say, well, you like Shakespeare, you hate Shakespeare, I love him now, it's the greatest thing of all time. And it's like, okay, you can like it, but that's not really going to solve the problem. You're just mimetically continuing the cycle. You hate it? Oh, I love it. That's still imitation.
And
it doesn't break the problem.
And that's the problem is, by and large, identity politics used to be a phenomenon on the left.
Right.
Now it has become the political currency in the United States of both sides.
And the idea of a riot to get your way was something that was a little bit more seen on the revolutionary left, and now with that capital thing and other things, now the right's imitating that too. So and that's another thing Girard talks about, is this merging of the self, these merging of two rivals. The more they compete, the more they look exactly the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mimetic doubles.
But in the moment, when you're in that conflict, you look farther apart than ever, and that's why it's so hard for us to break through that conversation and say, take one of those rivals aside and say, hey, look, you're looking exactly the same. And they're like, are you kidding me? There's a mile of difference between me and what those dirty, deplorable, racist supremacists, and they say, are you kidding me? Those globalists selling us out, selling out our country, hypocrites. And so they can't even see, but the big picture, that big God's eye, eagle's eye, you can kind of see they look kind of the same. One's burning the city, the other one's attacking the capital. You know what I mean? One's saying, hey, my identity is what defines me. The other one's saying, well, my identity is what defines me, and I'm oppressed. And they say, well, no, I'm oppressed. But nobody wants to stop and say, hey, you know what? We're both getting oppressed by this, right? We're all getting oppressed. Let's stop fighting over who's got more oppression points. But that's the one thing we can't seem to do as a society, because we feel like if we drop that guard, if we drop our guard, we're going to get devoured, Because Jesus was killed. Jesus said, hey, follow me, but he gave us the worst pitch in history. He said, take up your cross and follow me. And everybody's like, yeah, okay. You're not really serious, right? Take up your cross and follow me. That's my best marketing pitch I can give you. I got nails through my hands. I got nails through my legs. That's why we're always, bringing the sacred, right? We're always trying to bottle up Jesus into an object, because we really don't want to let that become the subject of our life. Right. Wait a second. You're not serious. I'm not literally going to take up my cross. That's a suicide pact. That's what everybody says. When you know what I mean? When I tell people, hey, should we follow Jesus? They're like, no. You don't bring Jesus into politics. You don't bring Jesus into the midst of this. That's going to get you killed. I don't think that's necessarily the case, but it could be. Because there's always a risk you could get killed by the mob when you try to get in the middle of a raging mob, right?
Well, and one of the problems with the world we find ourselves in, identity politics reigning supreme, each side looks at the other and says that the differences are irreconcilable.
Right.
That the other side is 100% evil.
Right.
And both sides will ask the question, is it even possible for us to build a bridge together? Is it possible for us to ever sit down and put our disagreements aside? Mm-hmm. Oftentimes both sides will say that the other side's mind is completely toxic. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, and the problem with that is that if you bring Jesus into it, what Jesus says is all of our minds are toxic, mm-hmm. with the exception of the grace of God.
Mm-hmm. So it's a humility that we just don't want to get to, because again, I think we're in this fight or flight mode where we feel backed up into a corner. Everybody does, and all their little cliques and tribes. And it's like, we don't have time to make peace, because our opponents are going to devour us. And there's a kind of truth to that, but Jesus isn't saying to flinch,
Right.
He doesn't say to flinch, because the flinching motion will make you get devoured. Kowtowing to the mob will get you devoured, And he's not saying, hey, yeah, just, sweet talk him and be nice because you'll survive. That's that's not the way of Jesus. Jesus looks down when the crowd is wanting to stone the adulterous woman, and he averts his gaze, as Girard would suggest, to prevent them from projecting their hatred into the eyes they see in him. This is an Aikido move. He's trying to deflect and save this woman's life. And he knows that if he stands and looks them toe to toe and says, do not kill this woman, that is going to create a mimetic reciprocal, oh yes, we will kill him, and you're a devil, because they're going to project their own hatred into his eyes, because the eyes are the windows to the soul. Mm-hmm. And when a tribe has lost its mind, and when you've lost your mind in a possession of a crowd, you're like, I'm going to do it now because you told me I could. right. And so Jesus is like, I'm going to take a
like
small
a child, man.
So Jesus is a social Aikido genius. So he takes the posture, he gets low so as to not get them bowling up on him. And he starts doodling around, gets small posture. He says, he is without sin, cast the first stone. So he ninja flips their whole thing, and they're all thinking about, well, who is going to cast the first stone? Is it Bob? I know Bob's kind of a dirty dude. This guy's over here like, Tim, hey, Tim, I saw you last weekend during Shabbat. Okay, yeah, you're going to do it? Okay. And now all of a sudden they're like, yeah, but about me, yeah, I got a stone in my hand. And he totally deflects the collective tribe, the identity politics of we're pure, she's impure, she's got to go. And he breaks it into persons. It's like there's a frequency of we are one, and he goes, scrambles that frequency. And they're like, oh,
you know what, man? It was
I'm a human now.
It was probably the fact that all them dudes probably were with her with some Jose Cuervo in their hand, you know what I'm saying, that last weekend.
Yeah.
And you know what I'm saying? So,
Their bad deeds were their bad
exactly,
deeds.
right?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
But he saves that life by bringing them back to their personal responsibility for the action of violence that they're lost in a sea of sameness. Because if everybody's throwing 50 stones, you can always say, yeah, I don't even know if my stone hit her. I think she was already dead. I think my stone hit the ground. You know what I mean? Because that's what crowds do, right? I was at the Capitol. People say
I didn't do it.
Yeah, that's like people saying these people running into the Capitol. Well, I was just there to take photos. You don't know who's who. You don't know who's doing what.
Right.
I got a mask on. That guy had a mask on. That guy's Antifa. This guy's a Nazi. This guy's a, save the rainforest.
Did
we
you
got to
throw-
save the whale guy
Did
here.
you throw a punch and get caught on camera?
Yeah, And this year it's so hard to talk about Girard because we are swimming in Girard's playbook. His ocean.
Yeah.
There's so many sacrifices. We got everybody wearing masks and yelling at everybody and anonymity and all this stuff. And it's just kind of hard. It's like drinking from a fire hose trying to stop the news cycle. Like, all right, let me show you what's going on here. Let me show you what's happening here. Because it's like he wrote the play here,
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that we need to be able to kindle a conversation around a fire with people who are at war with each other and make peace. That's what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean we have to say you're right half and you're right half. You got to be a haphazard kind of like a, you know what I mean? Like a Mickey Mouse piece. Like let's all agree, just to kind of not, kind of smoothing out the surfaces instead of, you have to be able to hash it out. But we've got to be able to bring peace into the conversation here. And not try to act like we're above the fray, moderate, centrist. That there's a false way of doing that piece. Oh, I don't have any particular issues here. I'm just going to sort all you tribal, folks out. No. We're all in it. We've all got it, and that's kind of the point of Jesus, right? Is to recognize that's why he's talking to people who are his own people, who are oppressed, and he's saying you got to work on yourself. That's that's a cold water on people, People who are losing their jobs, people who, in our time, they're losing their careers, losing their family identity, losing their, breaking marriages apart. All this stuff's falling apart. And Jesus is in that conversation of our time. He's like, you got to worry about what you're going to do. You know what I mean? And they're like, I don't want to hear that right now, Rome's running my show. Rome's occupying us. Our leaders are selling us out. And you're telling us we got to worry about how we respond to that?
Yeah.
You're blaming the victim is the feeling. And that's why people don't want to hear the Jesus message, because Jesus, he reconciles the oppressor and the oppressed together. And people are like, we do not have time for that. The left is oppressing us, the globalists are oppressing us, or patriarchy is oppressing us. In every one of their stories, you can find truth. They've all got bits of truth here, You're like, yeah, that's true. That is oppressive, the way men did that to women, or the way this identity group would structurally oppress another, and those things don't go away overnight,
Yeah.
And that's something that one of the mistakes of the right reaction, the right wing reaction to the left overreach of smothering everything into this vindictive equity thing, is that the right overreach reaction to that is everything's fine. That was in the past. Women were treated that in the past. Nothing to see here, African Americans were treated that way, but that's in the past. We're fine. I didn't have, and we don't talk about the collective memories, the collective how would you say, residual, the afterglow of these things that continue generationally, right?
Right.
And there has to be a way to redeem that. How do you redeem that conversation?
Don't you think that a lot of it is us coming to grips with, every one of us, coming to grips with and understanding that everything that we hate in our enemy is really deep seated inside of us. That every bit that let's say somebody that hates the oppression of the patriarchy, that capacity, possibly even that act of oppression, is something they're doing in their own life against someone else. They may not even be aware of it.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to hate that thing when you see it in someone else.
Right.
But it's very hard. It's much harder to deal with it in your own life and with yourself.
Yeah.
Like when you see what's happening with Cuomo, right? Is that when you hear all these news stories about Governor Cuomo and all this stuff coming out, his sins are coming out. How does that make you feel when you hear that?
Well, and it's really interesting. You've got Cuomo and then you've got Ted Cruz.
Right. At the same time.
Yeah. You've got both at the same time. So for
a tale of two hypocrites.
Yeah. So for somebody that's on the right wing, they're going to look at somebody like Andrew Cuomo and they're going to say he's a liar, he is an oppressor, he's all these horrible things, right? And then someone on the left is going to look at Ted Cruz and they're going to say he has abandoned his place in the world. He shirked his responsibilities.
Took off to Cancun during
the
ice storm.
He just goes off to Cancun. He's privileged, but the thing is that both sides are going to look at their opposite, at the scapegoat, and they're going to impugn all of their hatred onto that person. But the thing is that those are probably things that they hate about themselves, that they're not dealing with themselves.
Yeah. It's that take the beam out of your own eye. You know what I'm saying? It just goes right.
And you think that kind of might have something to do with the way, the targets for scapegoats, unfortunately, through history have been the weak and the folks who are disabled.
Yeah.
And it's like the manifestation of a physical disability in a community. They feel like, well, that's evoking something about what they're disabled in terms of their own weaknesses and their own frailties and their own feelings of not being able to perform in certain ways that they want to be able to perform, and so they have to expel their wrath onto, well, you're a monster because you're disabled or disfigured or something, or you have an illness. The gods hate you because you're worried that they might hate you because of what you do and what you are failing at, and what your cough is. You cough it into, you cough quietly after you went after the witch causing all the plague, you know what I mean? It's like, I don't want to be accused next. My friend Monica Paulus from Papua New Guinea, they tried to burn her at the stake because they accused her of being a witch. And they have this concept called jealous, that there's this deep-seated jealousy that burns and it can get out of control, and it's often targeted towards women. And oftentimes it's based upon wanting to have access to property that they have or possessions that they have.
That women have, or
it could be men too, but oftentimes the burnings of witches happens towards women. In her culture.
Right. So they're envious.
Yeah, envy. Yeah. And so they're jealous of something they have. And a lot of this was stoked by, Western capital, markets coming into their community, and people accumulate wealth and technology fast, and that could incite, a lot of jealousy, a lot of deep-seated envy, and so she said that, when they want to take you out, it can be the littlest thing that can start it. It could be a yawn. You yawn wrong. Oh, I saw a witch. That's a witch because you yawned wrong. You had a spirit coming out of you, and you were trying to cover it up. And they would use that literally as the occasion to start a vicious burning of a woman alive. This is happening in our time. This is not happening 1,000 years ago.
Right.
But in some sense, we're doing this to ourselves in a more indirect way today, in the West.
It's like what Surratt was talking about, when a lot of Indian scholars and stuff will blame Great Britain for every ill, that is within Indian society, because they'll say they're the ones that came up with the caste system, right? And that's a way to kind of like deflect, and project all the things that are wrong with India onto, the colonial masters, right? And I think this goes the same way for like colonial Africa, right? Like, well, everything that happened in Africa is because of the Europeans, right? And not reflecting on the fact that like African kingdoms were at odds with each other and sold each other's, children and women and sons into slavery, right? Because they were trying to claim, the resources. So it's like, I always give the example of like the, like the Akan peoples versus the people in Dahomey, two rivals with each other. You know what I mean? It's like the priests and the gods are telling me it is right to enslave those people and sell them to white people because we are supposed to have control over, this area or these resources. You know what I mean? So, but today's narrative, it's, well, Europeans came in, the French came in and the British came in, the Dutch came in, the Portuguese came in, and that's when, we got corrupted. We were corrupted once they came in, right? It's like they the idea, like, we really want to have like the white man's burden. You know what I mean? Like you have to deal with this and be confronted with it, and like you can't put any blame on anyone else, right? Because you have done more to destroy the world than anybody else. Like what African kingdoms and Indian kingdoms did was on a small scale, right? But what Europeans did was so global that there's no comparison to it or something like that.
Your sin is greater than the other sin.
Right. Now,
because of the scale and extent, right?
Now the only, I think for me, the only way that I would accept that in some ways, and I don't want to say accept, I want to say it in a way that, like, I would say Christianity was so deeply ingrained in the European culture that they knew to do better. And because African nations didn't know that, and these Indian kingdoms and in Asia didn't know that, right? In the Americas, people in the Americas didn't know that. I always have the perception that medieval Europeans, knowing that these people were ignorant of the gospel, used that to their advantage.
How?
Because it's like, well, if they don't know about forgiveness and love and all of that, and they're doing this stuff to each other, they're enslaving each other, they're battling with each other, they're fighting with each other, why would we tell them about the gospel and about peace and love
when we can make a killing off
when
of
we
this?
can make a That's the only way that I would like,
because they were instead of recognizing that some of the technological advances they had were an effect of the gospel, they were trying to make it all about our superiority. Our distinct, they're trying to take credit for advantages that they did not have right to claim credit for. Right.
Yeah.
They didn't have the idea of a gift from God for the things that they had that gave them that technological advantage or something in that moment, right?
Yeah. That's I mean,
interesting.
Might be a little far-fetched, but I don't know.
Well, I think that's a very interesting point. And if you look, I think if you look at people like Cortez and Pizarro in particular, and there were many other Europeans that went all over the world to Africa and places, and no doubt that there were Europeans that showed up and exploited the localities and treated the people terribly. It's interesting because if you look at what those Europeans said about those people, they justified their exploitation by saying that these people were like the spawn of the devil, or that these people were animals, or that these people were somehow less than human and didn't even have any redeemable qualities, that somehow they were outside of the purview of the Christian story that's unfolding. And I think they had to do that in the light of the gospel in order to justify the exploitation
to shield their conscience
of those people. Yes.
Yeah.
So they were doing the same thing that they were judging them for doing, right?
Right.
Oh, look, they're savages dehumanizing each other, so we'll dehumanize them so we can keep doing it too.
Right.
So why would God give this kind of revelation if humans can't handle it? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like you get this story that says, hey, stop killing each other, stop sacrificing each other to have peace. And that story spreads like a virus contagion, kind of slowly, and it falls apart and slowly and fits and starts. It kind of causes people to say, hey, maybe we should stop burning witches to stop the plague, and maybe we should examine that growth on that dead body over there and see if maybe something on that nose, if we could look at it closer with a piece of glass, might give us some insight into how to stop this plague without going to Martha again, because she's dead, and we got a couple other people that look like witches, but after they're gone, I don't know who else to blame. So it's kind of like you have that introspective moment where that blind, it's the Jesus Aikido being played out in history. The who will cast the first stone thing is haunting cultures that are baked in that. As much as they shield it and try to objectify Jesus and make him an object that they can put in their pocket and try to protect that revelation, it still hits them in their conscience slowly, right? And yet that story gives people the insight to be able to develop scientific technologies that does give them a comparative advantage against other people who don't have that biblical tradition story. And yet, for some reason, humanity can't seem to handle that. They end up colonizing everybody, or exploiting what they instead of cashing that in for mercy, they cash it in for profit. They cash in that technological insight or that comparative advantage in that moment.
Yeah.
So why would God give us something with it's like giving you a toy and then we were over there shooting. You know what I mean?
Right.
Giving kids a gun and they're
But
it's like, why are you doing this?
It's like what Jesus says. It's like the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. You know what I mean? Like I just can't get over the fact that I could get something out of this and live, sit up in a cabana and sip on coconut juice. You know what I'm saying? Like why would I give that up in order to be, you know what I mean? And that's one thing I think a lot of people, we always think like, oh, well, I wouldn't be like that. I would love my neighbor and I'd be nice and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, okay. So, get the money and let's see how you behave.
Right.
Like I'm not, you know what I'm saying? I'm not going to lie and sit here and be like, yeah, I'd be just, take it all to the Lord. And like, you know what I'm saying? All my money's going to the church. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to give 10% of my, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know about that, man. I don't know about that. That'd be a hard bargain. You know what I mean? It's like you really have to, you really have to struggle. You know what I'm saying? You really have to work on that. And you have to, that's it's a self-sacrifice. You know what I mean?
But Christianity has so baked into our storytelling and our ethics and the movies. I always point to that movie, that one of those latest Jurassic Park movies, Jurassic World or something, where the end, the climax is they've got to unleash these GMO dinosaurs into the human population or exterminate them all. And they're so self-sacrificial.
Yeah. They're
so Christian, like, I'll take the plank out of my own eye here. They're like, all right, guys, we're not going to euthanize you. We're not doing that. That's cruel and that's hateful. It's not your fault that we brought you guys back as GMO dinosaurs. You're beautiful animals. You have a lot of hope. Open the gates and let them things run wild in the suburbs, and that's how the movie ends. That's so self-sacrificial. In the ancient mythology, you were tearing up Grendel. Tearing that Grendel up. Bam, 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 You didn't do no, hey, let's let Grendel out. Grendel's a misunderstood GMO dinosaur, you know what I mean? You're like, no. Grendel's got to go. Right. Grendel's got some teeth. Get Beowulf to whoop up on some Grendel. Tear his skull apart. Yeah. And we're so Christianized that we're like, oh my goodness, we cannot sacrifice, much less sacrifice a chicken. We can't sacrifice a T-Rex.
The baby arms are not their fault, right?
Yeah. That thing's got teeth on it. Don't worry, it's not his fault. Let him use his teeth the way he needs to use his teeth. So we're so sacred in our treatment for those who would be candidates for sacrifice. We don't want to slay the dragon. We're going to unleash the dragon in our own neighborhood. You know what I'm saying? So we can go get along with it.
Don't you think that in that there's a presumption of innocence? That if you take those GMO dinosaurs, that there's a presumption of innocence there.
Right. Yeah.
And that it's that overarching statement of Christ, let he who is without sin cast the first stone.
Kill the first dino.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. Exactly.
But it's really interesting though that makes sense to our society, that people will say, oh, that makes sense that the innocent GMO dinosaurs, that it makes sense for them to be released because we wouldn't want to cause them harm because they're innocent.
Right.
But on the other hand, many of them will wish ill will upon their political enemies.
Right.
But
because it's that plank thing again. It's like I'm a human, so I'm so obsessed with the plank in my eye as a human that I will submit and give deference to the other. In this case, it's an animal. You see what I mean? Yeah. That's why you get these people raging on YouTube comments about someone catching a fish, and you'll see them like, I hope you die for catching that fish. It's like, it's a fish, bro. They're eating. You're not raging in the comments about a spider, grabbing a hold of an animal and injecting it, its venom and its slow death and decay. They're not like, stop it, spider.
Right.
You oppressive, awful, subjugator. It's like, no. But they'll do it to their human because it feels like it's them, right? In relationship, like when you see the human catching the fish, it's like, that's me, that's team human. And look how they're picking on that poor little fish wiggling around. And if you look at it, you're like, yeah, I can see the pain of the little fish. You kind of get into it too. You're like, yeah. You shouldn't wish that the fishermen die, but you know what I mean? But like, I can kind of see your point. That fish, you start to empathize with the weak.
Yeah.
That's that Judeo-Christian inheritance of taking care of the outsider, including the little guppy. The guppy, make room for the guppy. But the point is, if we make room for the guppy with force, you're sacrificing the fisherman just to save the guppy.
Right.
That's the same thing. That's where we're at today. You know what I mean? It's like, and so it's kind of like, how do we get into this? We can see this train wreck happening. Girard and Jung and all these folks give us some toolkit to kind of see how it's happening, but yet we're still in this void where we don't know what happens next. We're not exactly sure how to avoid this train wreck, this slow motion train wreck that's getting a little faster.
It seems like the solution would be for us to figure out how to universally make everyone aware of, or to universally. For people to universally become more conscious of the fact that none of us are without sin. Because then it would become more difficult for us to cast that stone. No matter if it's against some privileged person at the top of the patriarchy or some privileged person on the top of some matriarchy. That if we really come to terms with the fact that we are not without sin, then it'll be very difficult for us to cast that stone.
But see, what the critical theory type woke left would say to that is that you're enabling the oppressor to get away with it. That's their problem with that. That's why they can't let go of that for them. You're enabling the oppressor, and the right would say something simple. You're enabling the oppressor to get away with hurting and abusing and whatever they feel, because it's again about the feeling. Words are violence. Remember that. Words are violence in this new postmodern world. Because words are the new vestige of myth. Used to be you would tell a story. Odin, demands this, and this is why we got to kill you. And now it's like these words are where we contain violence, and we use them as weapons now. And it's where, like, the way you're talking right now is making me feel very unsafe. Okay? It's like all I said was math is okay. I said math is okay.
I'm triggered.
Yeah, and it's like, the way you're talking about Shakespeare right now really, really makes me feel like I'm not in a safe space, okay? And it's like, these are words, okay? This is Shakespeare's words, to be or not to be. And it's like, they're hearing to kill or not to kill you. And there's this viciousness about words and language, and you know what I mean? And there's this desire to deconstruct it all and then rearrange the stack to give vengeance points back to the people who Shakespeare was disgusting to, who he was a bigot to or something, to make it fair. Don't laud Shakespeare because he was a sinner and he wrote too well. And he only wrote too well because he must have been, he had some kind of conspiracy that was helping him out, that he was benefiting from, some kind of, situation in the hierarchy. But that's kind of where, we had to be able to come into that conversation and say, okay, it's okay to have a concern for justice. That's the problem I don't like with some, Christian circles, and is that they want to say, no, there's no justice issue. We just need to work on, kind of keeping things the way they used to be and rolling it back or something, double down back there. It's like, no, there is some justice stuff that needs to happen, some severe, justice conversations. But how that looks is very important.
And that's one of the and that's one of the reasons that institutions are so important in society, right? Because if there's a community, if there's some community institution, it might be a local government, it might be a local church, it might be a local civic organization, but
a bowling club, right?
Yeah, a bowling club, possibly. And,
Lions Club or something.
Yeah, and what that little community or institution would do is it would help us to mitigate our differences, right? And also too, the more opportunity we have to coexist together and be face to face, the more we come to realize, even though we disagree quite a bit, and I may even believe, or one person may believe another person to be to be evil incarnate, if they have to face one another, if they have to actually face one another, then they start to see the common humanity in the other person.
Right. It's about letting people see their neighbor, letting the crowd see the woman as themselves, right? I'm not going to stone this woman because, I have sin too, right?
Yeah.
He is without sin, cast the first stone. The left wants to stone Jesus for telling the woman, go and sin no more. The right wants to stone the woman because she's impure and causing the neighborhood to go down the drain,
Yeah.
As I tell people, it's like, the right wants to be tougher on crime. So we're going to have a big giant nanny state that gives you 3 square meals a day, government health care, a roof over your head, a government job. You know what I mean? That's real tough on crime, isn't it? Yeah, you're going to extend the life sentence to a double life sentence for a drug? Okay, you're real tough. You have a little college education. It's a cruel thing, but it's still not very macho the way they try to act like, let's get tough on crime and lock them up longer, you know?
They do what the left does, but just even worse.
Right.
It's like you're getting confined for real. You know what I mean? It's not just to the projects. It's like
but that's not tough.
Yeah.
It's abusive, but it's not a tough way of dealing with something. Tough love is a family member slapping you and saying, get your shit together because you're addicted to something that's killing you. That's tough love. But this kind of incarceral state that we have where it's like, we're going to have a sterile bureaucracy with no skin in the game. You know what I mean? Just kind of bureaucratically shuffle you as a number into a giant nanny state, machine as prison labor and all this. That's not tough love. That's not love. There's no relationship there. That's just a mechanistic, like you were saying before, the old way of the World War I type era, that whole 20th century of mechanically chopping, cutting, separating, expelling, and not having any kind of focus on the human there. That's being at the equation, right? The epitome of science and rationality turned against humanity. Yeah. Right? Right. Fascinating. Shannon, what's the answer?
I think it's what Jesus says in the scriptures. Love God with all your heart, mind, and strength. Right? And the other one is like it, is unto it, right? Love your neighbor as yourself.
It's just that simple, huh?
It's not simple, but it's a simple prescription. Mm-hmm. It's like an equation, simple equation that explains everything. You know what I mean? It's like a simple answer to a huge problem. You know what I mean?
Because if you love your neighbor as yourself, you're not going to scandalize them or oppress them
Right.
or vilify them
Yeah.
or dehumanize them
Right.
or surveil them or cage them
Yeah. Because you see
for things you wouldn't want to be caged for.
Yeah, because you see them in you. You know what I mean? Yeah. You know. You know. They bear the image of God. You know, they are in the image. They're made in the image of God. What you want to see about that person is not. What you want to see about that person is not God. You know, what you want to see about that person is not a person. What you want to see about that person is evil. That person is mean. That person is violent. That person is, you know,
Ignorant.
That person is, you know, a whore. Whatever you want to say. Like, they ain't the child of God. You know what I mean? And they ain't made in the image of God. And they're not like me, because I'm not like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I don't bear any of those characters. Like, I don't have any of those characteristics.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And we have, you know, we all have a hard time with that. You know what I'm saying? Like, just me saying it, it's like, I know that's not how I think about people when I look at them.
Mm-hmm.
You know? Yeah. You know?
You look in the mirror and you see Baal or what? Medusa? Who do you see in the mirror? Who do you see in the mirror?
I see imperfection.
Mm-hmm.
And it's difficult to see that and to own it. Because when we only see and embrace the perfect parts of ourselves, that makes us blind.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes us act carelessly, and it makes us become tools of forces that can cause harm to others.
Right. Gerard said that's what kind of the point of being Christian is, to realize that you scapegoat too. Because you never believe that the person that you're laying all your indignation against, because anger feels good, it makes you feel like you're right.
Yeah.
To be in righteous indignation. You never want to believe that, like you were saying earlier, that you're indignant. Maybe they have harmed you, but also there's also an element that's often about what they remind you about what you're capable of, or what you do tend to do yourself in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They're oppressive, but you oppress.
Yeah.
They're greedy, but you're greedy. They're ridiculous the way they treat their coworkers or their employees, but you kind of wish you could do too if you could get away with it. You know, and that bothers people. And that's what it means to repent. That's that idea of repentance, which is the most, like, even if I say that word, I feel like I'm saying a cuss word, you know, because the way the people think of that word, like, what did you just do? You just fouled up the room with that word. Because that's how far we've come away from that, right?
Yeah.
We're so caught up in envy that the last thing on our mind is repentance. Because we are really convinced that person has things because they're lucky and they don't deserve it.
Mm-hmm.
And I could do so much better if I had the things they have.
Mm-hmm. I wouldn't sit in a cabana and sip on a coconut, you know, whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah, with my feet propped up on
Exactly.
oppression. I wouldn't do that. I'd do it right.
Yeah. Do it the right way.
Hopefully we'll do it the right way. Because this is a dark time in different ways, but it's also a hopeful time for me too. Because there's something about becoming in the likeness of Christ that I think as we do that, as we become more like Christ as a human species, and you might say, David, we're nowhere near that, but just if we're on a process, if we're in a direction towards that, if history is going somewhere, that it seems like the more closer we get to that, the more all of our imperfections are going to haunt us. We used to be worried about, hey, you just genocided my tribe. And now we're worried about brands and logos and language and math, you know? So we've come some way, you know? I always like to illustrate how the Colosseums versus the NFL football. In the Coliseum times, they weren't worried about gladiators getting concussions. Today, we're worried about how do we make those pads and rules differently so that football players don't get concussions. In the gladiator times of Rome, they weren't concerned about how the gladiators treated their girlfriends. That's a big scandal that has plagued the NFL, is how do we deal with domestic abuse coming up as an epidemic in some cases. In the gladiator days, they weren't worried about, hey, let's all stand in solidarity or kneel or whatever about what the Roman emperor did in his oppression to a person, with the execution of Roman law. That wasn't a thing. When the Roman emperors came in, you all stood in unity and reverence, or whatever it is that you would use to defer to that unity. And that's the work of Jesus. Jesus did that in history. Jesus made those cushions and those football helmets a little thicker than they may have used to be. You know what I mean? Because we are haunted by what we're doing. So much so that we can't even do simulated violence anymore without being really concerned about the ugliness of what we're going along with. And let's hope that we can use that haunting to really change things and have a balance between the feelings and the logic and the planning and let's reconcile these things together, to redeem both sides. So the question is, can humanity, pass that test, so to speak? Can we actually figure that out, or are we just gonna spiral off into a fiery blaze here?
Yeah. Is it gonna be continuous, cyclical, spring, winter, Baal cycle? Persephone going down to Hades, going back up to her mother Demeter.
It's like all the politicians that we elect, every time they win, they say, I just want unity.
Yeah.
Just want unity, guys. Just want unity. Let's all unify. But what they really mean by unity is, I just want you all to fall in line and just obey me.
Yeah.
And God doesn't do that, right? He says, I'm going to bring peace, but not as the world gives it. Peace and unity, those kind of go hand in hand, The peace I'm bringing is going to cut through the fake unity like a sword. And it's going to cut families against each other. Because it's going to haunt us so much that we're not going to be able to get along with the traditional institutional way of doing things. Like, we're going to deconstruct so much of what we are and who we are because we're haunted by that sword that Jesus has brought into the humanity, cutting through our false sense of peace and unity. And so we see through that, these false calls of unity. Hey guys, I just want us all to unify. Let's unify. But you're a terrorist. And we're going to surveil you, and we're going to have a war on terror here at home.
Yeah.
Oh, but we're going to unify.
Yeah.
But we're not going to wish any of your people who die any well wishes.
Right.
Might gloat a little bit, but we're going to unify.
Yeah.
But you got to submit. God does the opposite, He submits to us, our unity.
Yeah.
He submits to our unity machine by being the scapegoat.
To break out of that cycle. It's like that whole thing of unity. It to me sounds like cyclical time. You know what I mean? Like, we want things to go back the way they used to be, like some normalcy, which is let's get a spring, fall, whatever. You know what I mean? Like, let's get that summer solstice, equinox, whatever, going.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But God makes the rain fall on the just and the unjust. It's not about who you sacrifice that makes the rain fall, I'm glad we did this. We need some s'mores.